Today I would like to continue my series on sort of the Queen's Gambit positions. So last time we looked at d4, d5, c4, c6, and knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, and we briefly checked out a6. I didn't go into too much detail, but I hope I provided you with a little bit of main lines and little ideas. And we started looking at e6. And in this last time, we finished up looking at bishop g5. So today I'd like to look at the other move in this position, which is e3. So here, this is sort of known as the Moran variation. It's really popular right now. It was more popular a couple of years ago, but it's still played quite often. So I think that there's a lot of interesting stuff to be looked at here. The main move now is knight bd7. So here, white has two main options, queen c2 and bishop d3. So after bishop d3, black usually plays dc4. So black's idea now is to play moves like b5, bishop b7, and do that with tempo. But he doesn't want to play dc4 immediately, or until the white bishop on f1 moves. So after d takes c4, bishop c4, b5, bishop d3, we got sort of the proper Moran variation rather than the delayed Moran. So this is a very interesting line. It was played many times in the 𝐎𝐲𝐞𝐬𝐽 match, which happened, I think, a year and a half ago or so, where Anand won two extremely nice games on the black side of this variation. There's lines that go like bishop b7 and then e4, b4 with some complicated play. There's a6 is quite common. That was what was played in the match. And then after e4, c5, there's a few ideas here. There's e5, there's d5, but one of the main ideas is like e5, c takes d4, and there's many plans, but I think the main one is knight takes b5. And Anand was consistently playing a takes b5, e takes f6, g takes f6. And his plan was often to play moves like bishop d6, rook g8, bishop b7, and really put pressure against the white king side where he's likely to castle. Meanwhile, he's going to keep his king on like e7 or something. And there were a lot of very interesting games. I know fellow chess.com employee Vinay Bhatt played one last year's World Open almost a year ago against guy I mentioned last week, Meskin Amanov, which was a game where he said after 20 moves, which is only 8 moves from this position, they'd both used up nearly all their time. And okay, Vinay ended up winning the game, so, you know, go chess.com. But this is a very interesting position. I think there's some lines that go, so castle, bishop b7, queen e2, rook bishop d6, or something like this. Rook g8, g3, bishop d6, lines like these, bishop b5, and I remembered, so queen b6, a4, king e7, rook d1. I'm just trying to show sort of a main variation, and rook g4. And in this position, okay, white has 2 extra pawns on the queen side, black has 2 extra pawns in the center. Both sides seem to have very good attacking chances against the opposite king. And here Kramnik, who is playing Anand, is white in this game, came up with a really nasty idea. He played bishop f4, which at first looks insane, just hanging the bishop, but then after bishop takes f4, you see the point is knight takes d4, hitting the rook on g4. And if the rook moves away, let's say rook g7, well, you're going to start to sacrifice some stuff, and black's going to come under some very serious attack. And a game did go like this. I don't remember exactly how the entire game finished, but black ended up winning in a very crazy, wild game. So I think that there's much to be looked at here. It's very concrete, and it's hard to play these positions without being super well prepared, but sort of to give the general overview, it's that you're going to try to, white's going to try to attack in the center, keep his queenside pawn mass and hold his king safe, and black is going to try to use his center pawn mass, keep his king safe, and attack the white king side. It's a lot of rich positional ideas here. I think it's a very interesting variation. For example, even another move here, rook takes f4 looks quite interesting. Rook g8 check. I don't even know if, I'm sure this has been looked at before, but this is the first time I've seen it. I'm just looking at it right now. I didn't prepare to look at this variation. I just thought this just looked interesting. It just hit me. So lots to look at there. There's other lines, of course, too. One of them being, like in this position, I think knight takes e5 has been played a few times. The idea that after knight e5, a b5, bishop b5 check. We have, again, sort of a similar position where white has the 2 extra pawns on the queen side and black has the extra pawns in the center. Although here I think white's lead in development is a little bit more pronounced. Although I think after bishop d7, knight takes d7, queen a5 check, bishop d2, queen takes b5. The position is relatively playable for black, although my feeling is white should be a little bit better. I'm certainly not ready to prove that yet because I don't really play this position for either side. But I remember I've looked at this before and I thought black was doing all right, but white probably was maybe a little bit better. And yeah, this was a very interesting line. There's other ways of playing for white too other than e5. You can play d5 in this position as well. And I think there's some lines that go like c4, bishop c2, ed5, ed5, and we've got sort of interesting positions here. And there's many sorts of positions that can come out of this. After d5, I think queen c7 is quite a common move as well. And then there's just lots of stuff going on here. It's hard to figure out exactly who's better and why. So I think it's, again, just a very interesting position that requires a lot of study. But the main ideas for white will be to try to get behind his passed d-pawn and get castled, try to use a lead in development. Black is going to try to blockade the passed d-pawn, maybe expand on the queen side, maybe even castle on the queen side, and try to put pressure on the white king side and then in the center with bishops on d6 and b7. So this is also a very interesting position, but also one where I think a lot of concrete opening theory is required to play, and I usually don't like that very much because I think it's better to play when you're on your own than when you're just following what your computer is telling you. So I'm going to go back to this position after knight bd7. I guess that was kind of a brief look at such a complicated variation, but I sort of prefer this other move, queen c2, which I think also is complicated and interesting, but it's not quite as crazy complicated. And I've found that oftentimes in these crazy wild positions, all that really matters is how well you've prepared your stuff in your computer. So the logic behind queen c2 is that black is going to want to play d takes c4, and white doesn't want to waste a move to recapture with the bishop. So it wouldn't really make sense for black to play dc4, bishop c4 in a variation where he's already behind in development. To give white an extra tempo with queen c2 is extremely risky. I think this would just be bad for black if we play in the same fashion. Let's say something like this: e5 takes. The queen on c2 is clearly better placed, and I would be worried for black. Also, now that the queen is on c2, white has the option of bringing the bishop back to e2, which is often a better square. With the queen still on d1 after b4, white's knight would be kicked into oblivion, but here we have the nice e4 square, which will be quite pleasant. So d takes c4 isn't really played, but bishop d6 is the main move. So here there's a few things to try, but only I think 2 really merit that much strength. I think like e4 has been played, but it doesn't lead anywhere. So the 2 moves that I think are interesting here are bishop d3 and sort of the crazy Shabalov-Shirov gambit with g4. So I kind of like g4. So the idea of this move is to gain space on the king side. Tactically, the point is if knight takes g4 after rook g1, black is going to have some trouble with his g7 pawn. And white's plan is going to be to attack in the center on the king side and to castle on the queen side. So with this happening, I think that black is probably a bit worse. So knight takes g4 is not the main move. There's d takes c4 with the idea that after g5, the knight now has the d5 square to go to. And there's h6, which prevents g5 kicking the knight away, but it does let white open some lines with g5. So this would be extremely interesting, I think. But probably, Yeah, it's just interesting. I'm going to leave it at that because this actually is a variation that I like to play for white, and well, because I'm still an active tournament player, I can't give up all of my preparation, of course, to just anybody who has a chess.com membership. But because I will say that the main moves here are rook g1, bishop d2, and h3, all of which have the ideas of castling queenside at some point, playing g5, opening the king side, and getting a very sharp game. And if dc4, I think after bishop c4, a very strong idea for black is e5. With the it's very logical. I forget who said it. Maybe it was Botvinnik, that if someone's attacking on the flank, you should counterattack in the center, and that's exactly what black's doing. Although he is offering a pawn after g5, knight d5, because after g5 it would be a very sad concession to have to go to h5 or g8, but and g4 I'm sure will just get trapped. But after knight d5, if white wants to take the pawn, he has to give up the bishop here, because if he takes with the knight after cd5, pawn on d5 is immune due to some tactical trickery. So, but if he takes with the bishop, then in this position after queen a5 check knight c3, white's good. But after castles, white is a little bit undeveloped. His pieces are definitely coming under attack, and his king is certainly not the safest. Black also has the bishop here. I think black has more than enough compensation for the pawn. Black has won many games from this position. So normally after knight d5, white's played bishop d2 here. He's played knight e4 here. There's been some interesting games. I remember one game that 𝐎𝐸𝐬𝐧𝐞, very strong Israeli grandmaster, played, which went knight e4, bishop b4 check, bishop d2, take, castle, castle. Or sorry, not castles for black, because then e5 was hanging. He plays queen e7 first. Castle, castle. Now an interesting move, bishop b3. And white's idea is that black wants to develop his c8 bishop, but to do that he has to move his knight. If he moves his knight, he loses e5, so black is going to have to do something about the d4 pawn first. And he doesn't want, after e takes d4, queen takes d4, the knight to get to b6. But white also doesn't want to take on e5, because that accelerates black's development. So after rook e8, which was played in the game, white came up with actually a really nasty idea, I thought, with rook hg1, saying, okay, go ahead and take on d4, see what I care. And now, if black doesn't accept the knight sacrifice, it's going to be worse very quickly with moves like rook de1, and coming up, he's got very big problems. But after queen takes e4, a rook coming to e1 will take the rook on e8. And it's actually extremely important which rook goes to e1 in this position, but when it comes down to it, I'm pretty sure rook d to e1 is the better move. And after queen takes f3, rook takes c8, knight f8. The point is now white can play bishop takes d5. Queen takes d5 and queen b4 seems to win. The difference is that if white's rook were on d1, black could take g5 with check here and have a winning position. So I'll show that real quick. If white had played rook ge1, queen takes f3, rook takes c8, check knight f8. At the moment, black is of material, but his pieces are undeveloped and his king is exposed. So bishop d5, queen d5, if queen b4 here, then after queen takes g5 check, white seems to be losing. If king b1, then bishop f5 check, picks up the rook on e8. And if, okay, he's not losing. If rook d2, queen g1 check is a perpetual. So again, if king c2, then bishop f5, and if rook back to d1, then queen back to g5. So that's just one variation, but it sort of shows how both sides are playing. It's very aggressive, very sharp, and very interesting. So I'm going to go back to before g4, though, and talk a little bit about bishop d3 in this position, but I think I'm going to have to do that next time because it looks like we're out of time.